You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe rides again. Nick Wilson, Spencer German. Welcome into the show. As always, we are a relatively new podcast. Please make sure to follow along with the show. Apple, Spotify, 923thefan.com, the free Odyssey app, wherever you get your podcast. Have I mentioned Apple? You can also follow along the show on the 923 The Fan YouTube channel. And, of course, please make sure to subscribe there. And also, please make sure to comment. We did have one of our comments last week accused the show of clickbaiting with a headline.
Saw that.
That was, is Caleb Downs still a Buckeye, or something akin to that. And so, Spencer, you failed the people. They were pissed at you. At least one guy. And then there's another guy.
That one guy represents all the people?
I mean, I think, it could be all the people on YouTube. And then the best part is there was one guy who on every single post made the same rant, which was about Cleveland media or the media in general being racist. And I don't really know when he started posting that, but he definitely, in the last 6 videos I looked at, it was like the first comment. And now in fairness, it was hidden because he says a lot of bad words in it. But I was like, it's one thing to accuse people of racism in a YouTube comment. It's a whole nother thing to be going from video to video and just copying and pasting. That is a level, I will say, like, I disagree. I don't find that to be true, but I appreciate the commitment to the bit at the very least.
So this goes back not even just to last week's videos, like this goes back multiple weeks?
I think this goes to at least 6 videos. Wow. I'm pretty sure that it was at least 6 straight videos I clicked. I didn't even go back in any further because I was like, 6 videos, copy and paste. I mean, this is at least a 10-minute project.
I know at the end of last week's show, last Friday's show went off the rails a little bit. There were some comments made about Django Unchained and whatever. So I was going
No, we're not going to validate what is clearly somebody
No.
I don't think
I'm not trying to validate it. I'm just saying I could understand if his comment came after that video. Like he was like, oh, look at you talking about this. But the fact that it goes back multiple videos.
So referencing a movie, which in fairness, there's some problematic things in that movie. That's kind of the point of the movie. That does not. No. I will say you're being too kind. You're being too.
I'm not trying to validate anything. I don't even know what the comment was because I didn't go read that comment. I saw the comment about being clickbait, but I didn't see those comments. I'm just saying there were like the I guess like the point of reference for him to get to a point where he maybe said that on one video. I guess I could have been like, okay, whatever. We brought up a movie that has racial undertones, so I guess I get where you're coming from. If you want to throw it out there to whatever, just be controversial. But for him to go back like multiple weeks worth of videos, I don't really see where you're coming from. So,
as somebody who has watched Django Unchained a lot, I think that
it's a great movie
goes past racial undertones. I don't know if there's such thing as overtones or just tones.
That's fair.
But it's definitely, there's no under there. It's right there on the surface. Like, it's right there.
It's the theme of the movie. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say it's pretty pervasive from the very first shot of the movie to the very end of the movie. But again, you know what? To each their own. But how you doing, bud?
Pretty good. Wish it was still Monday's weather, obviously here in Northeast Ohio. But in classic spring football fashion, in Ohio especially, we just can't get any consistency with the weather. Well, one day it's raining, one day it's beautiful. Hopefully by April 13th, it's a little bit nicer. That's all I got to say.
I will also say that this podcast came up on my afternoon drive show on 92.3 The Fan because I was given endless amount of crap because I'm clearly broadcasting from a preteen's bedroom here. And that's another thing that gets a lot of comments. A lot of people jumping in like, I love the dream catchers, Nick, and just random things about your. I gotta say, my daughter has a really nice sensibility. and it totally fits her personality. She's been collecting dream catchers since she was like 4. But it's funny, like I actively got shit on the show of like, oh, why are you broadcasting in that room? And I'm like, I literally have no other studio space. Like my wife, when she works downstairs, that's her office. She has, literally works from home, is always on the phone for one thing or another. So like, I can't broadcast from down there. Plus, she'd hate to listen to this for 45 minutes or more. So like it's this, or you're going to see my bed. And I really think that's not what anybody needs to see. You're either seeing dream catchers or here's the thing, just for Keith Britton, our assistant brand manager, if I have to broadcast from my bedroom anytime, I'm going to make sure that I purchase things that I don't currently have in my house, like handcuffs that hang down from the side of the bed. I'm gonna like do a quick flip around, and there's gonna be a sex swing in it. I don't own any of those things right now, but I'll tell you, you're gonna see some things if I just to appease the one guy who's got a problem with it, and then says, well, everybody judges everybody in their background.
It's gonna look like a scene from 50 Shades of Grey in the background, is what you're telling me. You're gonna have your own slave room.
Is this your game room? Like what? You've got an Xbox in it? Dakota Johnson, I get it, because there's an X, so they're like X. It's an Xbox, I guess. No, I think the point was her character was dumb, and she didn't realize
I wouldn't call it dumb, Nick. I would call it naive. She didn't know what she was getting into. Okay.
Yeah. Well, all these chains and all these. Is this where you do like Pokemon? Do you play Pokemon in here? No, 100%, friend. Like a dude says, I've got a special room. You should run your ass out of that house.
Hey,
like,
it was
the best case scenario is he's a sexual sadist. That's the best case scenario. Like the next one is he's Ted Bundy. That's the second best scenario. And I have a special room and I'm dangerously good looking. Like, get the F out.
For what it's worth, I know nothing about that movie, the book, anything other than the concept of what it's about. But I do know that it had multiple movies, so it must somehow the relationship must have worked out. I don't know. As dumb as she was like, I'll tough it out, I guess, for however long this trilogy is going to go on.
I probably should stop making comments now because I have 75 and none of them are pure and none of them are right. So we're going to put a pin in the 50 Shades of Grey comment for now. Maybe off air we'll get into it. And I'll get more into my commentary. But one of the big pieces of news, obviously, there are 3 more practices this week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for the Buckeyes. One of the big news coming out of the Michigan spring practices is that their star defensive back, Rod Moore, tore his ACL in spring practices. And then from the Ohio State side of things, before we get into for the spring game, one of the notes coming out is that maybe the tight ends look behind the rest of the position groups. So G. Scott is tight end 1 and kind of his backups are not maybe playing up to what people were hoping. I think G. Scott's a certified G. I think he's going to be just fine this year. But depth at that spot is a concern for me because I just like, even last year it was Cade Stover and it was G. Scott. And I don't really ever seeing any sort of young tight ends that kind of pop there. So I think that's definitely worth noting. You've got enough wide receiver talent and running back talent to make up for it. But, man, we saw last year how Cade Stover really kind of gave them a different weapon when, Marvin Harrison was getting double teamed there. So you'd love to see G. Scott at the very least be able to step up.
Yeah, I agree with you. That is probably one of the more concerning position groups right now. But I don't know. I mean, I guess the question kind of becomes, do they have the horses on the outside? Do they have enough wide receiver talent that kind of helps mask that? Like if you have so many guys and so many weapons out there that you put somebody in the slot and that almost can maybe create for you with the tight end group, even without maybe having a dominant one like Cade Stover was. And yeah, I think there's some level of they'll miss Cade Stover this year. And that's just good. I mean, it's hard to replace a guy like that who was a physical presence, made some really, really special catches at times. And you're right. Like last year, there were moments where when the Buckeyes needed to go away from Marvin Harrison and find something else in the passing game, he was kind of it. It was Stover and it was Marvin Harrison Jr. And then when the run game sort of started getting going late in the season, it was obviously Travion Henderson. So he'll be missed. I would say it kind of falls in line though with what I think the biggest concern of this team is going into a year where they obviously have massively high expectations, is just the offensive line. Plus now you kind of add the tight end who at times is serving as an extra offensive lineman for you. And I don't know that blocking is so much of an issue with that group. I think G. Scott has shown an ability to kind of do a little bit of both throughout his time at Ohio State already. But I think it kind of goes in line with what I think is probably the biggest concern for this team, which is just the question marks of who's going to fit where, who's going to slot in as the starting offensive line, and then that starting tight end position, which is kind of an extension of the offensive line. What is that going to look like? And is that player going to be an additional weapon for, assuming Will Howard's quarterback, Will Howard?
I mean, given that Travion and Emeka Egbuka struggled with injuries last year, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the injuries are your biggest concern. But I mean, I think the only reason outside of injuries that offense can fail is that offensive line. And we'll get more into this later in the show. You know, we have a piece of audio of Ryan Day talking about Seth Mclaughlin earlier this week. It's so funny. They went all in on weapons, right? I mean, bringing back Emeka Egbuka, bringing back Travion, getting Quinshon Judkins, getting all this talent. Obviously, Jeremiah Smith from high school. And yet, Will Howard. And yet, you look at it, and it's like, you know, I'm just a firm believer. I don't know how you feel about this. I personally think, you know, and this is more of an NFL model. So this, you know, in terms of, you know, modifying it for college, there's some wiggle room here. If I'm building a winning team to win every single year, and I think this is what you saw in Michigan, I need dominance in the trenches. And I can make up for, you know, lackluster. I say lackluster. I don't want to say lackluster weapons, but maybe not all first-round pick weapons if you have an elite offensive line and defensive line. And listen, I think you've got a lot of talent coming back on the defensive line. Like, I actually think this defensive line, which is wild that we're saying this, could be better this year than last year, because I think they might have a little more depth as well, and that's another big piece of building a great defensive line. But O-line is the real concern. And whether it's McLaughlin, whether it is, you know, Simmons, whether it's any of the guys that were here last year, I'm really surprised they didn't hit the portal harder. And I know they brought guys in. They did bring guys in for visits. I'm really surprised that they didn't go harder in the portal on offensive linemen. And it wouldn't surprise me once the portal opens it up again on April 15th. It would not surprise me to see them maybe take another run if there are impact offensive linemen. Just because, like, I have no idea how you swap out one guy on that offensive line and feel like all of a sudden it's going to be a drastically better situation.
You and I were riding hard for on the Caden Proctor thing for a while. Like we would have loved if they would be able to kind of swing some money his way and bring him in. And I think you're right. I again, sort of following what I mentioned in my previous comment, like, if I understand you're right, like injuries are always going to be your biggest concern. I think the hope with a guy like Travion, for example, who was injury prone last year and has been injury prone throughout his time at Ohio State, is you have Quinshon Judkins to sort of spell him a little bit. And yeah, you had Mayan Williams before that and whatever, but I think it's a little bit different when you have a guy that can be like a lead horse guy and another guy that can be a lead horse guy. So your hope is them sort of splitting carries, prolongs their seasons, keeps them from getting too banged up, and that should help matters. But I definitely think if you're talking just straight up like position groups, where's there a weakness on this team? We get so enamored by the wide receiver room and Brandon Inniss and Jeremiah Smith and what type of impact he's going to have his freshman year, and Travion Henderson and Judkins, and the quarterback room seems absolutely stacked. And then on the defensive side, you got, Caleb Downs and your whole defensive line's back, but you forget I think the defensive line is going to be well equipped this year to win that battle in the trenches, like you mentioned, when you got so many guys returning who are ready to make already tailor-made impact players, whether it's Jack Sawyer or Ty Hamilton or Tyleek Williams or JT Tuimoloau. Like there's did I get it right that time?
Tuimoloau.
That's what I said.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, whatever, Nick. No, I think that group is actually ready to win that battle in the trenches. That has kind of been the problem for this team in recent years, especially in that matchup with Michigan. And I think it's the offensive line that you're looking at like, okay, how is this group going to pan out? And are they going to be better with just a year extra of experience? And I guess one addition through the transfer portal in Seth McLaughlin. And I think that's good that they added him. But your problems, I think, were also more on the outside as well. So I trust mostly Donovan Jackson. He's probably one of their better guys up front. I know he was the one that kind of gave up the hit on Kyle McCord in the Michigan game that forced the interception, but he was pretty steady throughout the year. But then around that, like, how does this group kind of shake out? Like Josh Fryer on the other side, Luke Montgomery, the lead kind of guy at right tackle. There's certainly some questions, and I too wouldn't be surprised if when the portal opens back up, they're in defense of Ryan Day and kind of how they handle this. I do wonder if they almost wanted to see what spring ball looked like, what the spring game's going to look like with the guys that they've brought back before they just made a rash decision there. And now might be the opportunity to actually go do that and be like, okay, we don't like where we're at, or we do like where we're at. Let's go make an extra move and bring in an offensive line.
All right, guys, we're actually going to hear what Ryan Day had to say about the new starting center, Seth McLaughlin, at spring practice late last week. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys. So obviously we're just talking about the offensive line. And I wanted to make one quick point before we got to the Seth McLaughlin audio. I just wonder what the disconnect is with the guys they bring in and the style they play. Because, like, I look at Michigan and what they've done the last 3 years, and they've kind of seamlessly identified the offensive linemen that fit their brand of football best. And I don't know if this is all a byproduct of having more of a high-powered offense, but I think there's this idea, and maybe I'm wrong on this, maybe they're just picking the wrong guys, which is entirely possible. I don't see enough ass kickers and name takers on the offensive line for Ohio State. And I think that's a big thing. I think that's an attitude thing as much as it is a style thing. And so there's a part of me where that cynicism is, well, I think the O-line is actually probably closer to average by the end of the season. The problem is, stylistically, do you have enough guys that move other guys off the spot on the defensive line and basically control the line of scrimmage? Because, again, whether it's style, whether it's what they're asked to do, whether it's the players themselves, that's the part where it's tough for me to look and go, oh, they'll just rebuild. And this year, when I say rebuild, I mean they'll just build off what they did last year, and this year they'll be a monster O-line.
It's a fair point in that sometimes it's just an identity thing. Like, if that's not part of this group's identity, how do you fix that? And I think the portal is an obvious answer. In a couple of weeks when that reopens after the spring game, maybe that's a place you find those guys. If it's something that they're still concerned about, I do think there's kind of a finesse feel to the guys that Ohio State's brought in on the offensive line of late in recent years. I think that's why Justin Fry has been kind of called into question as the offensive line coach of late, but it seems like Ohio State is kind of standing by him and backing him. I also think too, Nick, assuming again, and we've had the conversation 20 times over, assuming Will Howard is your starting quarterback, that's a guy who, because he's gonna want to run the football more so than what you did with, say, CJ Stroud, and even this year with Kyle McCord, like, you need an offensive line that is going to be able to be more bruising and sort of get downfield and create opportunities for a guy like Will Howard to run the football. And I don't think that should be understated either. Like, you want those types of players for a quarterback of of the skill set that you have potentially starting for you this year. So maybe that's another reason why I say they maybe wanted to see how it looked with this group and Will Howard, and now they're kind of going to assess it in this next transfer portal window. I don't know that for sure, but I do think that's another interesting element to all this. Is you talk about having these bruising name taker offensive linemen. I think you almost need that in an offense that's going to be run by a quarterback who wants to be able to run the football. Like, this isn't CJ Stroud. This isn't Kyle McCord who's going to stand. And CJ Stroud technically shouldn't have only been standing in the pocket. Like I think we saw in that Georgia game in the semifinals. He can run the football. And we saw it in his rookie year in the NFL. Ryan Day, just for whatever reason, didn't want to utilize that part of his skill set. So maybe that could have been something you did more if you had the offensive line for it. And so I think that's an important note about this team moving forward as well.
Yeah, so I do want to play, or we should play the Seth Mclaughlin sound by Ryan Day. Obviously, Seth Mclaughlin had, and it's funny, we point to the Michigan game in the playoffs where he was having snapping problems and kind of communication issues with Jalen Milroe, the Alabama quarterback. But if you really kind of like hear Alabama fans, the snapping problems have been an issue for Seth Mclaughlin during his time in Alabama pretty much all of last year as well. So we're going to play. This is Ryan Day kind of answering that and how Seth Mclaughlin has looked in practice.
A little early. Again, I could probably tell you more as we head into, probably next week. But, Seth's snaps have been great. I know that was a little bit of a concern. I think that had a lot to do with maybe the cadence or whatever, but so far he's been doing great. Carson, for the most part, I don't think there was one issue with the snaps today. So that's critical. And then, now they both have experience, so that's great. And then trying to figure out who the best five is will be important. But we'll evaluate it once we get on. You don't know about offensive linemen until the pads are on. You just don't. Today was a padded practice, but it was on and off for a reason. And then as we get, some inside drill going, a few other things, we'll get a better idea. But they both have had good off seasons and good approaches.
So, all right. I'm not saying Ryan Day's wrong. What I am saying is, when we just go to something on that end, okay, that's a big ask considering that I think center has become the second most important spot on the offensive line if it hasn't always been.
I think it's also important to know that it was an issue all year. Like if it was strictly just a cadence thing, I would imagine, especially Nick Saban being as detailed as he is, that's something he would have worked out by the time the college football playoff rolled around. So for it to still be an issue from the beginning of the season on till late in the season, I don't know that I just buy wholeheartedly it was just a cadence thing. And again, lump that into the concerns along the offensive line if you want. The fact that Seth McLaughlin maybe hasn't been as successful or had some miscues snapping the football. But it ultimately, I think Seth McLaughlin's a fine player. I think he's a good center. I just think when you're missing the snaps, that's obviously the biggest no-no you can have at that position. So you have to get that sorted out. And that's what this time is supposed to be used for. It's up to Ryan Day, Justin Fry, this coaching staff to make sure if it really was just a cadence issue, that you don't have the same problem here at Ohio State, or else we're going to be sitting there saying, okay, we all the warning signs were there. Why was this the one guy that you went and got in the portal, and then he's just screwing up offensive series because he can't get the ball to the quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like where we are with this and where we're going to be with this is I think it doesn't matter until it matters. And then when it matters, this could really matter in a way that, again, I'm not trying to be too melodramatic, but Ryan Day could be basing his career off a center we've already seen struggle with snapping the ball and unlike the most important possible scenario, which is in the national crowd watching the playoffs. So yeah, I mean, I think it's something that bears to have in the back of your mind, even if it's not something that we need to panic about yet.
Yeah, it's the reason why we remember the snap in the Michigan game, but people don't necessarily recall all the ones he messed up during the season. He actually messed up the snap on the Hail Mary that Milroe threw to beat Auburn a couple weeks prior. If people remember, that was a bad snap by him as well. And then Milroe kind of had to improvise chucked it up and they miraculously won that game, which would have obviously changed the entire landscape of the playoff if that had gone differently. So that's kind of interesting. But you're right. Like, it's those stages that he was messing up on. And so those ones stand out in our mind. And that's your concern, right? You get to the college football playoff, and then it's an issue that's costing you a win on the biggest stage. I know we're going to talk about the spring game being broadcast here in a second. How much of is that one of the things that you're going to be paying attention to in that spring game? Because Ryan Day just said it in that clip, like, it's hard to tell with offensive linemen until you get the pads on. Like, it's kind of a different game. Okay, well, pads are going to be on. This is your first opportunity to kind of go live. I understand they're not going like full speed, everything. It's a scrimmage, but they're not trying to kill each other. But this is kind of the first like real game scenario for him as an Ohio State Buckeye. How much is that something that you'll be watching in detail in terms of what he does during the spring game?
I mean, the O-line will end up being the most important thing, and just watching how they handle this defensive line. And again, the defensive line does not necessarily attack the way that we even saw like Michigan under Jesse Minter attack, but like, yeah, McLaughlin was the guy. So whether it's fair or not, all those other guys have been here. I kind of feel like we know what level they play at. So it's going to stand out a lot. And it's not just McLaughlin. I think Hinsman's probably in this conversation as well. If either guy struggles, and that's just because new quarterback, you need this to be pretty seamless. You mentioned the spring game. We did get the announcement. It's going to be broadcast on Fox on April 13th. So what's so notable about this, Spencer, is it's not just that it's going to be on Fox. Fox has actually handled previous spring games, usually for Ohio State, but this is going to be on the network. It's not going to be on Fox Sports. It's not going to be, our Fox Sports 1. This is going to be on the big dog on Fox itself. And, you add to it a week later, Michigan on the 20th, same thing's going to be said of that. Kind of a really cool moment. You can kind of see how there's an opportunity here to make spring games and kind of grow spring games into something even more important.
Yeah, I honestly, my first reaction, to be honest with you, Nick, was this is the first game being the first spring game, I should say, being broadcast on one of the actual, like, the network for Fox or whatever. Like, I was stunned by that because and again, I don't know. I mean, I follow college football. I guess I hadn't necessarily picked up on the fact that a team like Bama or a team like USC or Georgia or whatever had never had a spring game of their own on one of these networks. Like, I would have thought that just would have happened by now, because my galaxy brain is always thinking of, okay, what's the next way for them to make money? What's the next thing that they can put on TV? And clearly this is it, right? Like, this is the start of now the lane becoming, well, let's put our spring game on the network because it's football and we crave football and we don't have football this time of year. So it gives us a way to kind of put ourselves out there, market ourselves on one of the big national networks. So smart. It's a cool move. Like you alluded to, one of the reasons why I think and it makes sense that Ohio State gets to be one of the teams, if not the team, blazing the path for this, obviously. But yeah, I was just kind of stunned by the fact that we had never seen a game put on one of these big time networks, like the actual channel, up until this point.
I would like to see, if Fox is going to do this, and I think it's totally cool, and they're going to bring Joel Klatt. I would assuming they're going to bring, most of their A crew for this. And I hope that's the goal. I'd love to see a national broadcast and a local broadcast, meaning all right, like Fox, we're going to give you Urban. We're going to give you Mark Ingram. We're going to give you, all the big names. And then on like Big Ten Network, give me an all Buckeye cast. And what I was thinking about is like, give me one of the Big Ten Network anchors, but then give me like 2 or 3 Buckeye players. And I was saying, like, even like my co-host, Dustin Fox, like bring him in, bring in, Joey Galloway, bring in a couple people.
Do you want this to almost be like there's the national one on Fox? That's like think of it like ESPN Monday Night Football. There's like Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, and then there's the Manningcast. Like, you want the Big Ten to almost do like a Manningcast type thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a little less personality based, but definitely like maybe not because the Manning cast is a hit or miss for me. I definitely want it to be centered around the game instead of just like, hey, we're going to focus on this game and oh, here's a really cool audible that I'm going to call out, and then here's 5 minutes on Mark Wahlberg why he fucking hates and doesn't want to be here. But yeah, I mean something closer to a spring broadcast, but with a little bit of flair in there. I do like that. But basically, it's just a secondary look at this because most non-Ohio State fans are going to want to watch this game, don't want to hear Buckeyes talk about Ohio State football, right? Because it's going to be a little Ohio State-y. It's going to be a little bit nose in the air, right? And so that's what the national – and here's the thing. Yeah. I think there are fans who could have them on both TVs and just mute one side, mute the other. You know, like I just think –
if there's like a guest you really want to hear from – who like an Ohio State legend who's showing up. Maybe Eddie George shows. I mean, probably not Eddie George, but if he did, like, oh, I want to hear what he has to say. Or Cardale Jones shows up. Oh, I want to hear what he has to say, and then you can just flip back or whatever. Yeah, I think that's a cool idea. That's probably a cool way to do it.
You know, I think the most important thing is right now they make sure that this national broadcast gets as many eyes on it as possible, and I really hope they, you know, you kind of mentioned the Manning cast. I think there's some space between the Manningcast and traditional broadcast, and it starts with me on who's the broadcasters. I think that the fatal flaw with a lot of TV presenters and you know play-by-play guys is they're not strong in personality-driven situations, or they're kind of averse to public, you know, to opinions. So the problem with that becomes, if you only have one guy to bounce off of, you're kind of locked into however forthcoming that person is. Whereas if you let them play true point guard, which is, so basically you've got a studio crew that's handling the game. Does it make sense? Like, all right, I'm the point guard. I'll say what's going on in the field, and then I'm going to bounce between the three superstar analysts that we have, between Brady Quinn, Mark Ingram, and oh gosh, who was the guy I already mentioned? Oh, Urban Meyer. Something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to go about it. And I do agree that the Manningcast sometimes can be a little like caricature-y. Like it just becomes about the Mannings more so than like the guest you're having on. And I agree with that. But I mean, I think that would be an awesome way to set it up. Why do you think, like, I guess I'm just curious, what do you think triggered this to be the year that this happened? Because like I said, I would have thought it would have happened by now. Do you think it's just like par for the course, like the evolution of it? Or do you think there's like an actual behind the scenes reason as to why it's happening this way?
I can't think to a behind the scene reasons. Do you have one?
I mean, this is going down like the conspiracy theory rabbit hole a little bit, but I just kind of wondered if it was like another but another like, well, let's get one over on Michigan because everyone's talking about Michigan. Like, oh, they won the national championship. They're the belle of the ball right now. Everyone's talking about them. Everyone's up, wondering where JJ McCarthy is going to go in the draft and all this different stuff. Here's our chance to kind of seize back attention on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Let's be the first team to put a spring game on like the network for Fox.
I think
too far down the rabbit hole.
I think that's a very interesting theory, Spencer. I think that was really good.
Yeah, right. You think I'm full of shit?
A little bit. I think it's. I don't listen. I think it. I don't think Fox.
This program, like, I think Ryan Day on some level is. I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, Fox probably isn't like thinking about it that way. I just think Ohio State sometimes thinks about it that way. Like, especially Ryan Day. Like, he is trying his damnedest to get one over on Michigan finally, and like finally get that win that's eluded him the last 3 years. And so the idea to like, well, let's make sure that we're out in front of them again, and we're still the team being talked about, and all these different things. Like, I don't know. Sometimes my mind runs with that type of stuff, but I understand where it's not the best theory ever. It was just a thought.
What's your best conspiracy theory on why Fox is nationally broadcasting the Ohio State spring game, the first ever nationally televised spring game, as it were, But speaking of trying to get one over on your rival, Jim Harbaugh is not letting it go. That's next, but first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys, welcome back. And yes, we just talked about Ryan Day wanting to get one over on Michigan, the spring practice being nationally televised. Well, Jim Harbaugh, for his side of things, he might have moved on to might have moved on from Michigan back to the NFL with the LA Chargers, but he's not letting go of his special feud with Ryan Day. And you can maybe bring up the quote a little bit better than I can, but he was talking to the LA media about talking at the league meetings about the staff that he's built with the Chargers. And what did he reference there?
Yeah, so he was basically just asked about adjusting to the Chargers staff and getting to know everybody. And in classic Jim Harbaugh fashion, he was praising everybody. So the exact quote was, every person in that building, from equipment to training staff to social media staff, the analytics staff, there's so much respect to what everybody does. Everybody in that building, everybody in that organization, nobody was born on third base. They had to work to first, second, and third. And the players, same thing. That's the exact quote for you.
So this begs the question, did Jim plant the question? Or meaning tell the reporter beforehand, hey, can you ask me about the staff? Or has Jim just been holding on to this one? Because you can't tell me that this wasn't like a pre-written prompt. Jim is too deliberate on certain things that he didn't have this earmarked for. Take another shot at Ryan Day when asked about staff and team. Okay. There was somewhere in the calculus that's a real thing.
No, he had to have gone into this 100% planning to drop it. And he has no reason to take a shot at Ryan Day anymore. He's moved on, whatever. But
Does he need a reason? Maybe he just
that's what I mean. He doesn't even have a reason. He doesn't need a reason. But he just is. He was like, you know what? I just won the national championship with Michigan, and here's my chance just to sort of dig the knife in a little bit deeper on Ryan Day, just even from my now pedestal in the NFL, where I get to look down upon him as the king of the castle. But here's the other thing that I find interesting about this is how could he possibly know that everybody in that building wasn't handed anything, right? I understand he's building his own coaching staff, but he referenced the social media team. Does he know for sure that everybody on the social media team wasn't born on third base?
Well, you know how I know how this works. In every interview that Jim has sat in on, he goes, were you ever given anything? And it's a yes or no. And if they say yes,
are you a Nepo baby?
My dad died when I was 5 and I got $5,000. All right, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work out.
He fired him. Well, and that's the other thing that's interesting is if we ever hear a year from now, if the Chargers have an okay season and they're kind of in rebuild mode, whatever, which could happen. If he's firing some coach that he held on to, or firing some person in the front office or whatever that he's decided it's time to part ways with, isn't this just going to look bad and come back to bite him? Well, you told us everybody in the building wasn't born on third base, and then within a year you're already saying sayonara to some people. I don't know. You weren't supposed to pick those people, Jim.
So here's the other thing that I do find mildly hilarious about this is that the whole take on Ryan Day actually is wrong, because Ryan really didn't have an advantageous career until he got to Ohio State. Ryan started in New Hampshire.
But isn't that the point of the quote, though? Is that he was saying he didn't have that advantageous start, and then he was just handed the keys to one of the best programs in college football. I think that was kind of the root of what he meant.
Well, no, but I think the problem is born on third base. And again, we're going to relitigate this whole effing thing. Born on third base means that you didn't earn the opportunity to get there. Ryan did earn. Ryan went about the hard way. He coached at predominantly small schools. Yes, he technically spent, I think, a year in San Francisco with Chip, maybe a year in Philly with Chip Kelly. But like most of
he was with them for a year in Philly. Yeah,
most of Ryan Day's time was spent as like a guy making $75,000 being the OC and quarterbacks coach for like a Division I AA school. Like there is a part of it that it has become disingenuous that people have accepted as fact simply because Ryan took over for Urban in the perfect possible situation. But where it's kind of shitty is dismissive of all of Ryan Day's journey. And that is where it's like this. So, okay, this is not.
So I see what you're saying, but even back when Ryan Day got the job, like no part of you was like kind of looking at it side eye, like that's the guy who was.
I was the only person doing that. As a matter of fact, when I mentioned it on social media,
I was like, okay, like I guess that's fine, but they're not going to do a search. Like I was just kind of blown away they weren't going to do a national search.
Remember, the other search candidate was, I think, Dino Babers, who's since been disposed at Syracuse. But like, okay, divorce the Ryan Day part of this. This will always be my concern with Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh is no BS an elite head coach. And I mean that in college and in the pros. And I think Jim Harbaugh knows more football than just about anybody on the planet. And I think I think secretly he's actually really good with his players, but he just carries grudges in a way that I don't think that I do think becomes counterproductive. Yeah. I think that's why outside of Michigan, like Michigan was the place he was at for a decade. San Francisco, 4 years. Stanford, I think about 4 years. San Diego, I think about 4 years. Like, I would be shocked if Jim coached for the Chargers for the next decade. This feels like I'm going to burn as bright as I can. I'm going to take 5 or 6 years, and maybe if I win a Super Bowl, I can, ride off into the sunset. I just don't, especially in the NFL. In college, it's a little different because you have your fiefdom wherever you're at. There is a part of me that massively doubts that Jim can coach anywhere with that style of personality where he's constantly chirping, constantly his little, mind games. I don't know that fits the NFL game now because I think as fun as it is as a team when it's outward, you can bet that kind of stuff also happens inward just because of his personality.
And I do think, to go back to like the Ryan Day getting hired part of this, I do think on some level we always sometimes underestimate, I think, as we break all this stuff down from an outside perspective, what the vibe inside the team is like. And I would maybe give some credence to the idea that, and it's funny because now Michigan basically did the same thing, right? Like they just hired the guy that was like the path of least resistance. And we're all kind of joking about the same thing. Like when I was Sharon Moore born on third base. And we had that, we talked about that in an episode a couple months ago, but I just think, like if the team, if for the sanctity of the team and keeping things kind of intact, Ryan Day was the right option, then I can understand that. Same way I can understand why Michigan would do it with Moore. But it is obviously just curious that you're right about him holding grudges though, man. Like he does, and I'm a petty person, so I don't mind that he does this. Like I think it's kind of funny and endearing in a way. But you're right, like to not let it go now that he's like moved on, proven everything he could possibly prove at the college level, now set to go try to prove again that he's still an elite coach at the NFL level. I don't know why he's got Ryan Day on his mind, but what's going to be funny about this, Nick, is that he might have to put his pettiness aside if Marvin Harrison Jr. falls to the Chargers at 6th overall.
Yeah, so no, the Chargers are 5th.
Fifth. Yeah, that's right. The Cardinals are 4th. Yeah.
Right now, it looks pretty certain that quarterbacks are going 1, 2, 3. There's what I would say is a significant chance now that there's at least one trade up into the top 4, and that could begin. I know New England's got the 3rd pick. I can't remember as the 4th pick.
Cardinals.
The Cardinals, yeah. And there's a lot of thought that they could try and trade out to get more picks into the future, and that would mean, and Jim actually pointed this out the other day at the league meetings. He's like, yeah, if quarterback's going 1 through 4, it's like the best possible scenario for us because you effectively become the number 1 pick of non-quarterbacks. Yeah. Which means Joe Alt, the just elite Notre Dame tackle, you could take him. Brock Bowers, the tight end out of Georgia. either Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison, whoever you want to believe is the number one wide receiver. You and I both believe it's Marvin. I mean, I think the most criminal thing, and the NFL does this all the time, by the way, because of quarterback hysteria and because of runs on elite talent in specific drafts, there's always a guy that you ask, how the F did he fall? Kyle Hamilton, what was it, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Kyle was a no BS top 5 pick. He fell to the 14th
because
pick
he didn't have a position. Yeah,
yep.
he didn't have a position.
Tyler Linderbaum was another guy. Okay, the center position is valued in the NFL, but when it comes to the draft, it's still kind of a faux pas to take a center with a top 15 pick. Some bitch fell to Baltimore with the 20th pick. Like that. Now, granted, a lot of it tends to happen to teams like Baltimore, where they just luck into, or honestly, Micah Parsons falling to 11 to Dallas, another kind of player. What would be unique about this is Marvin has a defined position, and it is the like, all right, you got your quarterback, go get your second most important thing, which is an elite receiver. Can you imagine Justin Herbert with Marvin Harrison Jr.? And more importantly, can you imagine Marvin Harrison Jr. with Justin Herbert and some of the other weapons that they've kind of put together there in LA? Like, that's the kind of difference maker move. And
because they parted ways with their top 2 wide receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, like, wide receiver is a massive need for them. Now, this is going to be fascinating too, because if it plays out that way that you just laid out, if it's 3 quarterbacks, first 3 picks, and then the Cardinals trade back because somebody else, like maybe the Raiders or something, who I think picked 9th, maybe the Raiders are like,
I think the Vikings,
the Vikings, maybe they're like, oh, you know what, we want a quarterback, we're going to move up and get one at 4, and then the draft theoretically outside of the quarterback position starts with the Chargers. It will be overanalyzed for days if he decides, I'm going to pass up a chance at Marvin Harrison Jr. And in all honesty, like, because this wide receiver class is good, you could theoretically like trade back and let somebody else take Marvin and then draft somebody else a little bit later in the draft, because there's so many guys that I think are going to be really, really good. But if you do that, you know, the first thing people are going to say is, the pettiness that he showed when he was still growing up or being born on third base is still alive and well with Jim Harbaugh, that he just didn't want to take an Ohio State Buckeye. Like, that will be the subject if that's what actually happens. Or if he just straight up took like Malik Neighbors over Marvin Harrison Jr., that would be even more drama in relation to the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. 100%.
See, you know, the crazy thing is, so I think it was last year, the Chargers had Quentin Johnson fall to them. Wide receiver. We saw how special he was with the Chargers. They've also got Josh Palmer, who's like a nice 2 or 3 wide receiver.
Yeah.
You add Marvin Harrison Jr. to that. And like they signed Hayden Hurst. They signed another tight end in free agency. I can't remember the name of, but very much like a good starting caliber tight end. And all of a sudden, man, I mean, because here's the thing. This last year, Cade Stover was nice. Abuka was never healthy. Travion wasn't healthy till the second half of the season. Marvin spent most of that season playing with guys who weren't ready to be in the positions they were in, and a quarterback who sucked. So as good as Marvin was last year, you put him in that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, good God. Like, I don't think we ever, I shouldn't say ever. I don't think we really got to consistently see the best in Marvin, especially because that last year he was held back by a quarterback who was not very good. And so it's weird. I don't want Jim Harbaugh to get Marvin Harrison Jr. because I don't want him to have nice things. I mean, I don't care if he succeeds. I actually think he's a hell of a football coach. I'd like to see if he can win with Herbert. But, man, there's a part of me that's like, you're going to gift that guy, that player, day one on the job. So, all right, guys, we got a lot to get into. Oh, real quick.
No, I was just going to say, I'm here for the awkwardness that happens. Like, if they draft Marvin Harrison Jr., well, he's going to get asked questions immediately about, like, oh, what do you think about playing for Jim Harbaugh, who used to match up on the opposite side of the rivalry, blah, blah, blah. But, like, in a couple years, once he's, like, been under Harbaugh's tutelage for a couple years and he's getting asked questions about, like, Ryan Day versus Jim Harbaugh, and he starts to, like, lean into, yeah, you know, Jim's a great coach. I'm glad to have, like, and it starts to become this love affair where he goes from talking great about Ryan Day and how, and that doesn't mean he still won't think highly of Ryan Day, but just for him to have to do like a 180 on his Ohio State allegiances to then be praising Jim Harbaugh, I will not enjoy that day. But I listen. I have a lot of respect for Jim Harbaugh. I'm like you. If he succeeds, great. I mean, I'd love him to be the coach of my team any day. But it's just going to be a little bit awkward and weird to have to eventually hear a Buckeye have to speak highly of Jim Harbaugh, assuming he succeeds, of course.
Well, the difference between Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day is, Jim wasn't born on third base. That's when we'll know. That's when we'll know that Marvin Harrison is fully crossed over there. All right, guys, comment. Would it hurt at all to see Marvin Harrison Jr. fall to the 5th pick and the Los Angeles Chargers? You're right, though. Malik Neighbors going over Marvin in that scenario would also be quite funny. We will be back later this week. We'll probably be back on Friday as their Thursday practices, so we kind of want to wait for all that to kind of trickle out. We'll be able to react to the first 2 practices of the week, but make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, the free Odyssey app. Have I mentioned Apple, where you can follow us? Also, you can follow along on social media at Nick Wilson Says, at Spencito _ and make sure to hit the subscribe button on the 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel. And please make sure to comment on our videos. We love to see what you guys have to say about whatever we've talked about. And we love it when you react to the headlines without really listening to anything, because every little click helps. Every little comment helps. Spencer, good stuff, buddy. Appreciate you.
Always a pleasure, Nick.
Go Bucks!